Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. Join your hosts, Anita Russell, Mavis Bauman, and Gail Hunter, as we create a brave space for conversations about racism, personal transformation, and accountability. Conversation provides a means to dive deeply into your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs and examine what emerges in your words, actions, and behaviors. The show is a journey towards anti-racism by cultivating change within yourself first and then out into the world. Learn to engage in racial dialogue using 4 tools: courage, conversation, relationship, and accountability. Discover how truth, reconciliation, and healing can emerge from honest and deliberate conversations. Manifest social change right now on Inflection Point Podcast. Well, hello, and welcome to the newest episode of Inflection Point Podcast. I'm your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis and Gail.
Hi, I'm Mavis Bauman.
Hi, I'm Gail Hunter, and welcome.
Yes, indeed. Welcome, because this is a really, really special episode for us. We are here today and we're celebrating our 1-year anniversary of Inflection Point Podcast on Transformation Talk Radio. And we have just been in the last couple of meetings when we get together and we kind of plan everything out. We've been really kind of going over like some of the things that we've accomplished. We've talked about some of the things that we started off to do, and many of the things that we started off to do that we have actually accomplished. And so today's episode is going to be about a look back and a look forward. So we're going to go through a little bit of a review and just talk about some of the really incredible topics that we've covered in the past year. And then towards the second half of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about where do we want to go from here as we start planning and moving forward into year 2 of Inflection Point Podcast. So in this first segment, we're going to talk about that look back. And one of the things that we talked about that we emphasized quite a bit when we started the show in the beginning is this idea, this statement, this belief that racism is a disruptor of health and wellness. And so we've taken that topic over the past year and we've looked at it from multiple perspectives. And so what we're going to do is start off with what we call our origin story. And I actually borrowed that term from another organization that does work in the anti-racism activation space, which we're actually going to talk about a little bit later. But in the origin story within the context of what is that action that was driven in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. So we're kind of using that point as our starting point. It was from that point that the Inflection Point Podcast actually grew out of that. So I'm going to start by sharing my origin story, and then I'll pass the mic to Gail and Mavis, and they'll be able to do the same thing. And you'll see how everything just kind of dovetailed. So if you've been following us for a while, you might already kind of sort of remember what my origin story is, in which it started with a family conversation. And this is going back to 2020. This conversation happened about maybe 5 days or so after George Floyd was murdered. And it was a conversation that I had with my younger daughter. So I have 2 daughters, Hillary and Olivia, and they were both preparing to go out on a Black Lives Matter march in the city of Pittsburgh, along with one of my nephews. So I walked into the room where Olivia was sitting, and she was sitting with her son, Cairo. And Cairo was just born in March of the same year. So, and during the time of this conversation, he was about 3 months old or so. And we had a conversation that started off with us really reflecting on the idea or the reality, if you will, that in that moment, our family represented 3 generations of protesting essentially for the same thing, the same ideal, right? And we kind of took it back to my mom in her day of protesting, which I kind of grew up and watched her go through various movements and things like that in her own journey. And then me in my college years, primarily when I did my, my share of protesting in the streets, protesting for the firing of a university professor and just different things in terms of, this was at the University of Pittsburgh. But just different things in terms of making the university experience better for Black students. And so then we get to the daughters and the nephew who are now preparing to go out. So that makes 30 generations where we've been essentially protesting for the same thing. And that is just to be able to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which we were born. So then the conversation shifted to the baby, to Cairo. And my daughter asked me a question, and that question stirred something up inside of me that ultimately led to Inflection Point Podcast. But it's the question that she asked me is if I thought that Cairo, who, as I mentioned at the time, was just 3 months old, if I thought that in his lifetime, somewhere along the way in his lifetime, that he was going to have to protest for the same thing. So that became the Cairo question. And that Cairo question, will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? That became the calling card, if you will, that kind of grew into Inflection Point Podcast. So the first thing I did out of that was that I wrote a book. And I wrote a book called Cultivating Change from the Inside Out, The Power of Being Human. And it's kind of this guidebook that centers around this idea of critical self-reflection and just really getting an understanding of who you are, your thoughts, your beliefs, your ideas, what emerges in your words, your actions, and your behavior. So I kind of lay out this guide for people to kind of do these really deep critical self-reflection type of work. Then from there, I created the activism through coaching model. A couple of other things, this whole idea of activism, anti-racism activation, and then the social impact mastermind, and then ultimately Inflection Point Podcast. And so this whole entire thing that's centered around the idea of activating anti-racism is really what our work together has been about for the past year. So at this point, I'm going to pass the baton to Mavis and have Mavis share her origin story, and then we'll hear from Gail as well.
Thanks, Anita. I think my origin story really starts with meeting you about, 14 years ago when you hired me to be the photographer for a corporate project that took us to South Africa. That was an awesome time to be in that environment together in a place with a very complex and sad racial history as well. But, my connection to you had continued over the years, and I've always found you very welcoming in terms of talking about racial issues. Part of that comes from, or maybe most of it comes from the fact that I was born white in rural Nebraska, and I was never around people of color, never. And I had a certain curiosity about them. I had a certain affinity. And I was just thinking today about why that was. Well, my sister and I used to listen to a radio station, KOMA in Oklahoma City, which had Motown music. And we just grew up on that. And I realized how much the music impacted me and my affinity without my really understanding the words. So coming back around to today, I realized the power of what Black people were trying to express at that time. I continued, my interest in Black studies. I took courses in college. I studied in a graduate school for international relations around all different kinds of people. But then fast forward to 2020, when George Floyd was killed, and I was around Black friends from my church and trying to understand their grief and what was happening. And I looked into their faces, and it just occurred to me that my being friends with them, my being nice, was not enough. And it was such a cold splash of water in my face that I thought, okay, I really need to get into this subject more deeply. And then I heard Anita on a workshop speaking about this very thing, cultivating the inside of yourself, doing this critical self-reflection to see what you believe. And I phoned her up and we chatted about it. And then the podcast came out of those conversations. And I just had no idea at that time how much I needed to learn and how much I just didn't know. I was never exposed to, in spite of being around a lot of Black people in my life, but I knew I cared deeply about racial issues. So that brings me here today.
Excellent, excellent. So Gail, tell us your origin story.
Okay, well, probably my origin story starts as an adolescent. I grew up in a small village kind of town that was fairly diversified, and I moved to a area around 14 years of age that was purely white. And there was a African American family that did move in, and somebody burned a cross in their front yard. And I remember feeling horrified and couldn't understand what that was about. And what was even worse was that nobody around me was feeling that way. And so I've always felt a bit of an alien in my family, so that wasn't too different. But that began my own path of really wanting to understand what that was all about. When I hit college in 1969 70, it was at the height of the hippie era, right, and protesting everything, but also for the civil rights and for and the Black Panthers were prominent at that point, and they were. My experience with the Black Panthers was that they were always interested in improving the community, and so my degree was an undergraduate degree in child development, so they wanted to create a playground area for kids. And so I, of course, went there to the meetings and found them very welcoming. And friends of mine thought I was crazy, but I didn't see anything to be afraid of. And so that was probably like my initial beginning of being more proactive. And then through the course of my own career and so forth, I've developed a nonprofit that was geared towards really helping people that didn't have the economic ability to find healing modalities and being able to access different holistic programs and so forth. And in a private practice, I certainly was working with people also that way. But when George Floyd died, I was just horrified. I mean, and so I began to look into what was going on, what was still going on, and how could that still be going on in 2020. And then I think before that even happened, though, I met Anita, and that was probably another beginning place of really delving deeper into my own conscious awareness of what needs to be changed. And she provided a mastermind class, which is, I think, Mavis mentioned taking a segment of that. And that was just an unbelievable process for all of the white people that were there. And because of Anita's unbelievable ability to reach people and to create that ability to look within ourselves and to see where those truths lie and to see what needs to be changed and what the beliefs are, because it is an inside job and we must look within ourselves. So that then I can remember telling Anita, I said, you have this incredible ability and gift. You must take it on the road somehow. And the podcast came to her. And then she asked myself and Mavis, and I was just very excited about being able to be a part of all that. So I am grateful for all that I've learned this past year. As much as I thought I knew, I took Black Studies, and when the first Black Studies class offered at Pitt, and as much as I thought I knew, throughout the decades of my life, I have learned so much more, painfully and gratefully.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Gail. So a lot of what we've experienced. So when I kind of look back on this is the way we created all of this, to me, is an example of true allyship. And so when you think about the idea of allyship, and there's multiple sort of stages, if you will, of allyship, and some of them are performative, and some of them are like roll your sleeves up and let's just lock arms with one another. And that's where we are. We are the roll your sleeves up, let's lock arms with one another, let's be honest with one another, let's speak truth with one another. And but we also do that in a way that is inviting, I think. And part of that is because we purposely built Inflection Point Podcast as this space that is built on the power of courage, conversation, relationship, and accountability. So, what I'd like the two of you to kind of give a little bit of insight on what those four things mean to you in terms of the work that we're doing, and as we start moving forward, the power of courage, conversation, relationship, and accountability. So let's start with you, Gail.
Well, I mean, sometimes I have courage and I'm not even realizing that that's what that is. So I've always been willing to step into a place that feels unjust to me. And racism has always felt unjust to me. So that was the easiest step I could take. Accountability is I really had to look in the mirror and say, so what am I doing now? Yes, I did all that, but what am I doing right now? And how can I up that some? And how can I really take more of a stand and reach more people and help people really look within themselves and have those conversations and with others that really explore the underlying belief systems that fuel all this. So I'm holding myself accountable for that and having conversations even outside of this podcast, and trying to motivate and cultivate that change that you talk about. That must be.
Absolutely. Mavis?
I didn't think that our conversations were going to take that much courage, but I learned through my co-hosts that I'm probably like a lot of people where we are very guarded about our pain spots, our vulnerabilities. But when you can enter a room like this and feel safe, and that whatever you say receives honest reflection, it's really kind of luxurious, and it's a real source of growth versus fear. So it doesn't take as much courage as I would have guessed, but it takes some for sure. And that ties in with the whole idea of a relationship. We have a relationship with each other that enables us to not posture and not hold back and share such honest feedback that again, fosters a lot of growth. And in terms of accountability, I think that one of the things that a lot me and that I and a lot of my white friends will say, this is not my fault. None of this race stuff is my fault. So accountability was a little more of a distance for me to travel. What have I done? It's not so much that as what are the systems I'm living in that are still hurting people of color? And I want to be accountable for the beliefs and the behaviors, the voting patterns that I have that might support the racial strife in this country. I want to be accountable for those. I want to know what those are. And I would encourage everyone to seek otherwise, how can we change this 400-year-old issue? We
And
have to be accountable.
Yeah, and what you said about talking about the accountability, but it's also the relationship. I think one of the blessings in the three of us being able to come together and pull this off is that we already had firmly established relationships, genuine, authentic friendships before we got to this place. And I think that foundation is part of what kind of brings the success, if you will, in terms of how we're able to work together. And this is what I would like to see just multiplied and multiplied and multiplied across so many other communities and people and all of that. And like when you were making the statement about people making saying this isn't my fault, one of the things that I really really emphasize is that it's not even about blame.
No.
It's not even about blame,
No.
but it is an acknowledgement of the fact that all of us live in this racialized society, and none of us are immune from the impact and the influence of living in a racialized society. So you have some people who kind of have an idea of this thing called racism, or, kind of sort of in the distance. But then you have other people where it's their experience.
Yeah.
And those two worlds are very, very different. And so it's not about blame. I don't come from a blame perspective at all. I come from a place that says, I need to be a generational leader having these conversations because my grandson deserves to have a better life as he grows. And the only way that is going to happen is if we come together on multiple levels, on one accord. And that one accord is anti-racism activation. But at the same time, I understand people feeling uncomfortable.
Yes.
Because you have to be willing to step into your discomfort in order to even think about it, let alone talk about it. So you have to be willing to think about it and begin to think about it in a very different kind of way. And that's what when we set out to do this, that was part of what I wanted, was to give people this space to see things in the absence of arguing, debating, fighting, in the absence insulting one another. That's not what this is about. This is about genuine conversation based on genuine relationships and the truth. So we've talked a lot about this thing, harmonizing historical truth with lived experiences. And so what I'd like you all to kind of think about and share some of your feedback is this whole idea of the language of academics and how that couples with the language of grassroots action. And I say that because there are other organizations that all three of us are a part of. So, for example, ASALA, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, where we get a lot of our fuel from that educational perspective, from that historical perspective, because we get to hang out with lots of people who are historians, right? And they've been activists for like decades and things like that. And so that gives us energy to be able to be in this grassroots action. So it's kind of that language of academics coupled with the language of grassroots action. So how does that resonate with the two of you? Thinking about all the historical things that we've talked about in the past year.
I'll go.
Okay.
I'll go. I think I come from the place of wanting to learn, and as you both taught me early on, to intellectualize what I'm learning. And that was a difficult distinction for me because I feel like I can't understand what's happening without reading everything the academics have put out there. But that is not action toward anti-racism. And so now I really understand that this is not about having a head full of history or, even stories of people that you know. If you are not acting, you're not involved. And that was kind of hard for me to learn, but I got it.
And what you just said about the intellectualizing, that's what I was referring to earlier, when you have people that, have a sort of an understanding of, but it's usually this intellectual understanding of racism is, as opposed to those lived experiences where we experience racism. Very different context, if you will. So Gail?
Yeah, for me, it's about finding and listening and accessing that truth within myself. and helping other people do the same thing. Because when we access truth and we look in that mirror, as painful as it may be, as difficult as and frightening as it may be, and we access that truth, something resonates within our whole being and our whole spirit and soul, and that just feels true. And so, and education is part of that, certainly, and understanding the history is crucial. As much as I thought I knew, as I said before, I have learned even much more. And the more I've learned, the more I had to look within myself and see if I was carrying anything that was still connected to anything historically in my own lineage, right? And my own history, personal history, and to really examine that. And then I can move beyond that to take some action when I can find what that truth is. And so I think that that's crucial for every one of us. For whatever the changes that we want to make, we have to look inside. We have to be willing to take that risk of vulnerability, even with ourselves.
Right. And
Absolutely.
just to add, Anita, we need both, right?
Right.
We need the academic
Education.
collection of history and statistics and everything else, as well as ideas for action and to take steps.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because one of the things that, as Gail was talking, one of the things that I recalled, Mavis, was remember when we were talking about the Civil War
Mhm.
and you had your grandfather's diary.
Right.
Yeah,
And
great grandfather.
like, I don't want to, yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what it looked like to me was that you had this object, this historical object that was also a very personal object, but you didn't necessarily look at that through this lens and until we started having these conversations, and then you were actually able to take some of the stuff that we were actually talking about historically and tie it back to the things that your grandfather wrote in his diary. That's
Right.
powerful.
It was so powerful, especially after we talked, briefly today about how Black people are much more connected to their ancestors. I was not connected, even though I knew that diary existed. And when we were fleshing out our identities and how everyone learns who they are, the truth of who they are, I mean, that diary helped me understand where I came from. And then that my grandfather said, 250, 60 years ago, was it? Yeah. The whole war was about slavery, and nobody asked the Black people what they wanted.
Right.
Yep. So that was deep to learn from my family. That.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So actually, this is a good time for us to take a short break and we'll come back and we'll resume the conversation afterwards. So, welcome back. You are listening to Inflection Point Podcast on Transformation Talk Radio. And our topic for this evening is a year in review, looking forward and looking back. I'm sorry, looking backward and looking forward. So, I'd like to just kind of continue the conversation and just really think about what we were just talking about in the previous segment about being able to connect those historical things to you as a personal in terms of your personal identity and things along those lines. So Mavis and Gail, I just let me ask you this question. Do you now have a stronger sense, like all the stuff that we've been looking at historically over the past year, do you now have a stronger sense or a stronger belief in the idea that Black history is American history?
100%.
Yeah, so give me some of your thoughts on that.
Well, it's what just is very strange to me is that why we've never included the truth in the collective of our own history, right? Because how could that not be part of our history? It was the crucial piece of how economically people were able to make so much money with free labor, right? Which is what the slave trade was all about, not just in Europe and then obviously in the States here. So of course it was, it was. How could it not be part of our history? Every piece of it, even the horrible, horrific truths of it, that we all have to take a look at. And so as it says, if we don't look at history and change what was going on, we will repeat the same thing in some form. And we must look within ourselves and look within our own culture and history of in regards to racism and
Yeah,
where
and
this came from.
I'm so glad you said that.
Mhm.
The danger of repeating.
Oh,
Because as
yeah.
I was looking at the film earlier today, US and the Holocaust,
Mhm.
and I'm looking at all of this and I'm looking at
Right.
where we are, it's like the cycle.
Right.
We're still like in this
Right.
cycle,
That's right.
right? And if we don't make some changes,
Mhm.
we're headed for we're just headed for a bad place.
Right.
That's what I see. So what
Right.
about you, Mavis?
I echo the 100%. I
Mhm.
think that there's many of us who are shocked about how much history has been withheld through whatever means. And it makes me angry. It makes me distrustful of, I don't know, whoever is writing history, that these big pieces were left out. We would be in such a different place today,
That's right.
as Gail was saying, and certainly we are at a risk of repeating it. I don't know why that history should be any scarier than any other section of history, human history.
Mhm. That's right.
You know,
Right.
it just is.
Right.
And I think if we reconcile ourselves with history, we can move forward.
Mhm.
If we don't reconcile with it, it's the telltale heart, like Edgar Allan Poe. It's
Mhm.
under the floorboards beating,
Yeah.
and it's not going to stop, and
Mhm.
it mustn't stop.
Mhm.
And the time is now,
Well,
boy.
and we can see it hasn't stopped by the racism that still exists in this country, by George Floyd's death and
Right.
so many other deaths, right? And so it's still there, it's still existing because we haven't taken that look and learned what we need to learn and look within ourselves. You
Mhm.
know?
So when I was in Montgomery, I visited Brian Stevenson's The Legacy Museum,
Mhm.
which was a very
Right.
powerful experience. Like I can't even like I actually went there twice. What like in the course of like 2 days, I went to this museum twice. But I
Mhm.
also went to the lynching memorial, which
Mhm.
was
Mhm.
such a sacred experience, I would say. So as you're walking through and you're literally walking through names and dates and places of individuals that had been lynched, and I mean to the tune of about 4,000 names, and you're just walking through and you're seeing all of these names. And as I was watching the Holocaust film today, it just reminded me, it was
Yeah.
hauntingly similar,
Right.
Yeah.
just hauntingly
Mhm.
similar, right? More concentrated period of time when it comes to looking at the Holocaust. But when you look at the whole entire history as it relates to slavery in this country, enslavement, and its different phases, from the Atlantic slave trade to the domestic slave trade to Jim Crow, and all of that. But the sheer brutality and the violence
I
and
know.
the evil, dare I say,
Mhm.
it's exactly the same.
That's right.
It's the same. So we're at an inflection point now, I think,
Mhm.
where we have the capacity to really start acknowledging those truths, accepting those truths, but not just for the sake of accepting and saying, and forgiveness and all of that, but for the sake of changing,
Change. Yes.
changing,
Right.
dismantling white supremacy
Mhm. That's
and
right.
all of the institutions and the systemic things and the legislation and laws and all of that. Because when you think about our laws, it's not like they're rock solid. They're kind of
Mhm.
fluid,
No, that's right.
and they can change with whatever the political climate is or who's in office. But at some point, you got to get back to the idea that it's about humanity.
Exactly.
It's about humanity,
Yes.
Mhm. Right.
right? And so, again, just kind of all of this stuff that we've been doing. And one of the things that we had said a lot along the way is that you don't know what
Mm.
you don't know.
Right. right.
And that's, again, where the history comes in, but it's also where the conversation comes in. It's also where, when you think about the activism through coaching and using that as a catalyst for change, but that change starts with critical self-reflection.
Exactly.
So why don't you two of you talk a little bit more about the critical self-reflection process that you have gone to specifically? So if you think about all of the different topics, what was that one topic that may have resonated with you from that critical self-reflection perspective of all of the episodes and the topics and things that we discussed?
I don't know if I could pick one. There's so many of them. I mean, through the process of looking at the historical truth and what was really going on with the Civil War and what his priority really was, and through all the social determinants of health that we explored and examined. But what I think for me, it was really looking at, really facing that the horrors of what had happened, and under what belief system was that, right? That was under a belief system that said that if you're Black, you are less than. It's all based in the core piece of white supremacy and as much as our Constitution says that all men are created equal, it does not say women, it does not say, and it certainly was not including Black people or anybody of color. And that needs to change. That's at a core part of this country and this democracy. And within each of us, that there has to be the correction of that truth for humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe.
I think this relates to what Gail started out with, and it's the word brutality.
Mm-hmm.
I think I held slavery in my mind as just a social system that we had, and it's not legal anymore in most states. But you know, Anita, you said the word brutality so many times that I had to face, and I had to face it sometimes visually in the films we watched, and that how one person can cause such pain to another fully human being. And it's that brutality that made me think this just isn't a social thing. Like, you don't wear white after Labor Day. This is a deep, deep
Right.
sense of superiority and willingness to harm, willingness to take from, even when you have enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it shocks me that we're capable of such things. I'm just going to share with you again, and I don't think I've said this in the podcast before, but when I did my early work in Rwanda, I was voicing these same questions to a colleague of mine that was there, someone from the States. And I said, how can people do this? How can there be a genocide? People next door to each other kill each other's children, and, you know, all this horror. And this friend of mine said to me, you know, and it's biblical, you know, you Mavis are capable of great evil. And I had lifted myself above that concept.
Mm.
And I think that we all need to realize that we are capable of great evil, and it sneaks up on you. It sneaks up on you in these social systems that you don't even realize you are supporting. So the brutality has really hit home for me, and that was definitely a turning point.
Absolutely. I'd say one of the episodes that really, really hit home for me was when we talked about redlining, because the whole idea of coming out of slavery, we didn't get any reparations. We didn't get our 40 acres and a mule, you know, and we, you know, went into other, this other phase where we were trying to be a part of this American society, and we want to have a home, and we want to have banks, and we want to have all of these things that everybody else in the country who is a citizen is entitled to. But just really understanding how well orchestrated redlining actually was from the government.
Right.
down.
nationally.
That was led by the government,
Purposely.
working with banks.
Yeah.
Redlining. So this district over here is a high concentration of Black folks. So we don't do loans over there.
Right.
We don't put our businesses over there.
Mm-hmm.
So then, you know, when you have a community, a Black community, and you have a problem, say, you know, the sanitation department doesn't come on a regular basis like it does in other communities, that becomes a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you have an area like an open lot, and it's just overgrown with weeds, and you have people that are constantly calling the city, can you please come and take? So those are the things that people don't see. And so it's easy to make this assumption that, oh, those Black people, they don't know how to take care of their community. They don't know how to take care of their yard. They don't know how to take care of this. Meanwhile, we've been calling on the phone for 2 weeks. You need to come and pick up the trash.
Yeah.
Basic
People don't
things
know
like
that. People don't know
People
that.
don't know that. And so they want to pile all of this on top of us. Meanwhile, that historical information is right in front of your face. Redlining is for real. And it was orchestrated by the government.
Right.
Right.
It's like the Black Codes when they came out, right? I mean, it's like when you look at the historical reality of what the government sanctioned, that Black people didn't have a chance. I mean, they were never given the equality that they deserved in any of those areas, right? And you can see that still today.
Right, absolutely. And even when we took steps, said, okay, we need to build our own communities. We need to have our own banks. We need to have our own funeral services. We need to have our own insurance companies. We need to have our own real estate people. We need to have our own this. We need to have our own that. And how many communities did we lose through that same brutality and that same violence?
In one summer. I mean, that was
Red Summer. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so
successful communities.
And I just want to take this concept one step further. The fact that these communities were not supported by you know, sanitation, water supply, a whole host of things, causes a neighborhood to look a certain way. And my upbringing associated an untidy neighborhood with a dangerous neighborhood. And how unfair is that?
Right.
How unfair is that?
Right. So it's the difference between simply looking at things on the surface and digging to find the truth.
Yes.
Understand what's really
And
going on.
sometimes that digging occurs within yourself.
Yes.
Because at some point, people have to begin to root out, like, well, why exactly do I believe that? Why do I believe that?
Yeah.
Right? And why do I speak these certain words? Because you can't keep blaming it on the, you know, the people who are experiencing the oppression. Right? You can't keep doing that. At some point, you have to look at yourself as the oppressor.
Right. Well, look inside. What beliefs am I attaching to that are
Right,
really not accurate, are not really mine, but I've been collectively living from that place and not challenging my own sense of self, right? What I believe.
Yeah, because it's that socialization. We live in a racialized society. We're socialized into this racialized society. That's, and no matter who you are, you're socialized into this racialized society. So for white folks, you're socialized into the privilege. Even if it's sometimes you don't want to admit the privilege or it's unconscious privilege or whatever, we get socialized into, you better watch your back. You got to watch your back. You got to know who you're around. You got to know, like, the spaces that you're in. Is this a safe space? And all of that happens. It just happens. Like, we don't have to think about it.
It's automatic.
It's just automatic. Like, is this going to be a safe space for me? I'm walking in this room. I'm looking around. I'm the only Black person here. What is this going to be like for me? All of that stuff is a part of this whole entire thing when you are the person who is experiencing the oppression or experiencing the racism, right?
Yeah.
and all of that. So we are quickly running out of time. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about we're not done
Mhm.
and some of the
Well,
things that are going to be coming forward. So obviously we're continuing Inflection Point Podcast. Yay! So we will be
Yay!
moving
Yeah.
into year 2. So super, super, super happy about that. And also we are going to do an anti-racism activation summit in January.
Mhm.
And so where we are now is we're going through our list of people potentially to be speakers. So we have like a tentative program or a layout of how that's going to be. And it's going to be for 7 days, and we'll have 2 speakers per day, right? We'll record everything in advance. And so whenever it's time for speaker A for their interview to be shown, then that will be that particular segment. So we're going to do it over, like I said, over the course of a week or so. And 2, I believe that's what we landed on, was like having 2 webinars, if you will, per day. So they'll generally be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, where we're really digging into whoever that guest speaker might be. So we will be doing a call for speakers. So if you're listening to us and you want to kind of get some more information, we will have some mechanisms and things in place for you to be able to kind of do that. And then also
Anita, quick question. Is it structured that way with those a couple of webinars a day so that, like, say, business people can work it into their schedule or listen, not take up the whole day? Is that the way it's going to be structured?
well, because we made a choice, instead of doing it a webinar like in a day, like a
Okay.
4-hour webinar in like a day or whatever, we just decided to break it out over the course of a week.
I
And those
think that's
webinars,
awesome. I mean, I
yeah,
think that's really going to be consumable that way. Yeah.
exactly,
It will be,
exactly. And so
definitely.
people,
Yeah.
when it's all said and done, they will be available for a very short period of time afterwards, so people can still go back and they can do the replays, right? And
Awesome.
then
That's
we'll,
wonderful.
yeah, and then we'll set it
Yeah.
out so that if you want to have a VIP access where you can give access to those recordings anytime, we'll have that in place as well. So we're still kind of
That
working
sounds
out,
perfect.
Perfect.
working everything out. And then the Social Impact Mastermind, which is an 8-week journey towards anti-racism activation. And that was, I believe Gail and or
Right.
Mavis may have alluded to that a little bit earlier. And it basically falls into this crossing this bridge. And this is crossing the anti-racism bridge. And there's like multiple stages that you go through as you're crossing this bridge. Engaging in critical self-reflection, we've already talked about how important that is. Finding your courage to step into your discomfort zone, listening in authentic conversation, connecting in authentic relationship, leveraging personal accountability, and maximizing social impact. So that is a whole entire 8-week journey and it'll be very limited to 12 people. So again, more information will be provided for that as we move along. And then one of the organizations that we are also connected to is an organization called A Long Talk. And so there's a lot of correlation, if you will, between the work that they do and the work that we do. And so we do a lot of exchanges of information and having talks and all of that. So that's something that we will continue as we move forward as well. And when I look at their goal is to put an anti-racist at every dinner table in America. And so we are a part of that whole entire goal and all of this. So I'm really looking forward to continuing with that relationship. So any comments?
Wonderful.
Any comments, Gail, Mavis?
Yeah, I'm just very excited about that. And that is what I took before from you. And it was just an incredible course. And anybody who is interested in really looking within, stay tuned and think about actually experiencing that along with everything else we're about to do.
That is going to be wonderful. I think it's going to show me how different I've become over the last year and what I've learned. And it's very difficult to quantify, but there's a shift in me that is very, very positive and more compassionate and more loving and less judgmental. And how exciting. I mean, who doesn't need that on a number of levels, right? You know,
Exactly.
yeah, racism is about everybody. It's
right.
about every human being on the planet.
Excellent. So we're now down to about another 3 minutes or so left on the program. So what I want to do now is just kind of take this opportunity, Mel and Gavis, to kind of call out your, do your call to action. Where do you want people to go? And that sort of thing. And then I'll finish out with our closing quote.
Thank you. I'll go ahead. I just feel so strongly about Jeffrey Robinson's film, Who We Are. I would like every person who is listening now to watch that film. It was on Netflix. If it's not there anymore, go find it. It will put everything into context. It is such a launch pad for understanding why history needed to be brought forward in order to understand racism and why we are the way we are today. On a related note, I would like to, yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Okay. No related note. Go to See a Better Life.
I want Gail to be able to.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay.
Well, the nonprofit I do is called OMA, Center for Mind, Body, and Spirit. So please look up the website. It's OMA, O-M-A, Pittsburgh.org. But what I want everybody to do, if you're willing to, is just take a moment when you're walking down the street or you're in a store, and if you notice someone that is not of your same skin color, just notice what you feel inside. Notice if you're comfortable or uncomfortable. Notice what's coming up, and just be mindful of that. No judgment, right? No judgment at all. Just be mindful. Just observe it.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Very good.
So I would like to just remind our audience that we do have a Facebook group. We haven't had it for very long, so I'm hoping that we'll be able to build that up over the course of time. And it's simply facebook.com/group/InflexionPoint Podcast. And then you can also catch the latest news and events of what's going on in my company, because I'm really excited that I'm getting ready to launch a new website and, just have all these new things that are going on. And that will be at theplacetosoar.com. And so I want to read this closing quote. And this is a quote from Brian Stevenson, founder and executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, a widely acclaimed public interest lawyer who has dedicated his career to helping the poor, the incarcerated, and the condemned. And he says, "We are all implicated when we allow other people to be mistreated. An absence of compassion can corrupt the decency of a community, a state, a nation. Fear and anger can make us vindictive and abusive, unjust and unfair, until we all suffer from the absence of mercy, and we condemn ourselves as much as we victimize others," right? The closer we get to mass incarceration and extreme levels of punishment, the more I believe it's necessary to recognize that we all need mercy. We all need justice, and perhaps we will all need some measure of unmerited grace. So I want to thank you all. Thank you, Mavis and Gail, and thank you for listening. You've been listening to Inflection Point Podcast. We're here on Transformation Talk Radio every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Eastern time. We are totally out of time. We'll see you. Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can can cultivate change from the inside out.